Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Encompass Mental Health and Communications series. I am Louise Hanson. On behalf of the Encompass team, it is my pleasure to reintroduce our speaker today in what is the third and final session on sleep. Dr. Landry has honored us in sharing his expertise over these last 3 months. This is the final of 3 sessions, and they have been wonderful. For those of you who may not have participated in the prior 2 sessions, I'll just take a minute to reintroduce Dr. Landry. He is a sleep scientist with over 20 years of study and experience in this really important field. He completed his graduate research at Simon Fraser University and then focused his research efforts on sleep, aging, and cognition at the University of British Columbia. And he's done a tremendous amount of work with first responders as well. And he has brought all of this experience and expertise into these 3 sessions for us and for all of you. And we're just so pleased to have had him because sleep is such an important component to overall wellness. Dr. Landry is now in private practice as a sleep coach and an educator, and he does an amazing job of translating the science of sleep into meaningful, understandable concepts that really we our individual sleep challenges with. So Dr. Landry, welcome back, and thrilled to have you here. And just before I turn it over, just run through a couple of housekeeping points. We have purposely disabled the cameras and microphones so that everyone can participate anonymously. We are recording the session and we will record as well the questions and answers at the end of the presentation. We have saved these on the Encompas website where you can access those, today's session and prior sessions. Because we want those of you who may have missed it or just to have the opportunity to go back and revisit because they're just chocked full of information. So definitely worth rewatching. Also, Dr. Landry has graciously agreed to allow us to provide copies of his slides, which we have done for the prior 2 sessions, and we'll do again today, and we'll send those out afterwards. We're going to keep the Q&A to the end so Dr. Landry can get through the content. However, we'd encourage you to submit those through the Q&A feature on the site. Submit those as we go along, and those come to the Encompass team here, and we will read them out to make sure that those stay anonymous. Also, I just want you to know that this is the final Encompass series for the season. We will resume again in September. And so we'd love to get your feedback through that Q&A as well around what would be valuable sessions to you come the fall for the next season. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Dr. Landry, and thanks again so much for being here today.
Thanks for the kind intro. It's great to be back with the group and get into circadian rhythms and how they're the secret to sleep health. Key parts here, there's going to be, full disclosure, all of these sessions have been a ton of science, but today's session in particular will be science, heavy science, I guess is the way to put it. And so it is helpful to go through them more than once. So it's great that the recordings are going to be available to you so that you can do that. So just going through, we're now into the 3rd session. Circadian rhythms are the secret to sleep health. And so I know we've talked a little bit about what circadian rhythms are, but just to review, they're daily biological rhythms. So you can think of it as we have daytime physiology, biology, and behavior, and we have nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. And those 2 need to be kept separate in time because they're incompatible processes. And this will really become, easy to understand as we go through and look at different circadian rhythms. But an important part for you to understand is that they they evolved with the earliest organisms. Even back in the 1800s, researchers had discovered this phenomena of daily biological rhythms. This is an example of one of the studies that was done in the early 1800s, where a researcher had noticed that a plant on his desk, when he was in the office during the day, the plant's leaves were up. And then at night, when he was working at night, he noticed that the plant's leaves were down. And that was a biological rhythm. And so he was interested in whether or not this was just simply, a response to light in the environment. So, when the sun was up, the leaves were up, but then when the sun was down, the leaves were down. So he was curious of whether or not this was just a reaction to sunlight, or if the plant itself would anticipate sunlight. And so what he did is he had a plant that he put on top of his desk, and then he had a cabinet that was enclosed, and think of it as a constant conditions where the temperature was kept constant, and everything that this researcher at that time could control, he did. And so what he noticed, he had a little peeking window right here so that he could look in and see what the plant was doing. And what he noticed is that the circadian rhythm, the daily biological rhythm, remained the same. In other words, when the sun was up, the plant's leaves were up, even in the cabinet. And then at night, when the sun was down, the plant's leaves would go down. So the important thing to take away from this is that something was happening internal to the plant. It was able to tell what time it was without actually getting cues externally. And so that meant that these circadian rhythms were endogenous. They were internally driven. And that was a game changer. It meant that we have these circadian rhythms, these daily biological rhythms, and they are internal. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is so important. And I'll give you a different example. So the earliest organisms that existed in the ocean, they developed this capacity to tell time internally as a function of survival. So these earliest organisms lived in the ocean, and their rich food source was at the surface of the ocean. And the challenge for them is that the sun's rays were actually toxic. So the radiation for the sun would kill these organisms. And that, of course, poses a problem, because if you have to feed at the surface of the ocean, but you can't do it during the day, you have to have a way to anticipate when the sun would rise and when the sun would set. And this challenge was actually increased by the fact that these organisms needed to navigate. They needed to migrate to the depths of the ocean in time to protect themselves from the sun's radiation. Think of it as commuting, what many of us have to do on a daily basis. They also had to do. And so evolutionarily adaptive behavior was to anticipate the sun rise and sunset. And the organisms that were able to do that best would begin their migration to the surface of the ocean before the sun had actually set, so that they could maximize their time on the surface. And then they would begin their descent just before sun would rise, so that they could get to the depths of the ocean in time to protect themselves. But the objective was to maximize time on surface, to maximize the amount of nutrient-rich food that they could get. And so that gives us an idea of why these clocks, and again, they are evolutionarily ancient. These same clocks exist in every human today. And so what I'm really trying to point out is that we have this physiology, this biology, and it needs to be synchronized so that we can have properly timed behavior. When I talk about behavior, I'm really talking, when I say good behavior, in this case, I'm talking about not just what we're doing, but doing it at the right time. If you recall from previous sessions, I said, that timing is critical. It's not just what we do, we all know that we need to eat right, exercise, and get lots of sleep. But what few of us understand is that it's not just doing the right thing that matters. It's doing the right thing at the right time. And we'll go into this in greater detail later today. All right, so the importance here is that we need to synchronize our physiology and our biology and behavior to maximize the opportunity that is provided us given our environment. So the solar day-night cycle, for example, is a key driver of circadian rhythms. We need to be able to anticipate the solar day-night cycle in order to take advantage of the opportunities and adapt to our environment. So I've given you a couple of examples there of exactly how that's done. Now, if we're going to understand how to best improve our sleep, we need to understand what drives these circadian rhythms, because the sleep-wake cycle is just one of the circadian rhythms. And what drives these rhythms, we talked earlier about body temperature, core body temperature, and melatonin. But today we're really going to take a deep dive into understanding what time cues drive circadian rhythms. And what I've shown you here is that we evolved, as I mentioned before, to synchronize our physiology, biology, and behavior to the solar day-night cycle. But we also synchronize to meal times and our physical activity profile. So these are three things. There's other synchronizers as well, but these are the three things that we as humans have control of and can really have an impact on synchronizing physiology, biology, and behavior to our external world. And so this is done by pacemakers. Remember, we talked about, we have these pacemakers that synchronize the clocks throughout our brain and body. One of the pacemakers is the solar day-night cycle. It synchronizes specifically to our light exposure profile. And then the other pacemaker is synchronized by reward entrainable signals like food, exercise. Sex is an example as well. Anything, if you think of it in terms of anything that is reward generating, we synchronize to. And so those two pacemakers need to be synchronized together. So that's a key. Remember, everything comes down to timing. So to summarize, what's important about circadian rhythms? The first thing I want you to understand is they are daily biological rhythms that are roughly 24 hours. They are internally driven. Think of that plant experiment that I showed you. These rhythms, we tell time in the absence of external time cues. Now, the issue is that if we don't get strong time cues from our environment, then internally these clocks can drift out of phase with each other. And so that's a key driver for something called circadian dysregulation. And that's, a real challenge for shift workers, is that when they aren't providing the predictable time cues externally that allow us to synchronize, then what can happen is our clocks will drift out of phase with each other, and that leads to poor health and performance outcomes. The other issue to keep in mind is that these clocks continue to tell time, and it's critical that we synchronize to the external environment properly. And so that's really what I want you to think of is a key take-home message here, is that the key to surviving shift work is to take the circadian shifting out of the shift work. So to provide strong signals that allow us to synchronize and understand that our clocks need to know that day is day and night is night. When we turn our nights into days and our days into nights is when we get into trouble as shift workers. And so at this point, you could be saying, well, Glenn, I have to do that because my shift requires me to be up at night and to try to sleep during the day. And what you're going to learn in today's session is that there are ways to work shift work, but still anchor our circadian rhythms to stay day. So this is a key. We're going to use tips, tools, and strategies to help anchor our circadian rhythms to a day while still working night shifts. All right. So now let's explore the key drivers of sleep and understand how circadian rhythms play such an important role in our sleep health status. So now this is where we're going to get deep into the science, and I need you to just bear with me as I go through these charts. It's critical for us to understand what drives sleep. So on this first one that I'm showing you, what I want you to do is just focus on the blue shaded area for a moment. Ignore this red line for a moment. And remember from previous talks, we said that wakefulness is toxic. So right here is the beginning of our waking day. So we've been sleeping, and then this is the beginning of our waking day. This is, just as an example, 6 a.m. here. And so what's happening is the individual wakes up, and what you can see is that their sleep need builds as a function of prior wakefulness. And again, wakefulness is toxic. So the longer you've been awake, as we can see moving on this, the greater your need for sleep. So this is a pretty simple concept. In this example, we've got a person that's getting up at 6 and going to bed at 10 at night. So that you can see just before bed, there's this massive sleep need that's been accumulated. Now, a key thing to notice, though, is that here at 10 o'clock when the person's going to bed, you can see that as they're sleeping, their sleep need dissipates. So you can see that the curve is now going downward. And over here, this is the next day. So we're showing, day 1 and day 2. And so what you can see is that as they're sleeping, their sleep need dissipates. The important thing I want you to notice is that their sleep need dissipates faster. The rate of this going down, it takes less time for it to go down than it does for it to build up. In other words, we've evolved for this 16-hour waking day with unimpaired performance, and then an 8-hour sleep window, which is what you see here. And the individual, at this point, a lot of the sleep need has dissipated. So this is key, because if this blue area was the only thing that drove our sleep need, what we'd have is the person that would be up for a little while, build up a sleep need, and then would sleep for a bit. And so you'd end up with this short wake period and short sleep period. They'd be up for a bit, get tired, and then fall asleep. And so this is why circadian rhythms are so important. What we're seeing here in the red, and now I'll draw your attention to the red line, is you can think of it as sleep urge, the sense that we need to sleep, the sleepiness, I should say. So sleep urge is really our experience of sleepiness, whereas sleep need over here is the accumulation of need to sleep. And so what we're showing here is that as we sleep, our sleep need dissipates quickly. But notice that we will, at this point, we don't really feel this great sleep need, we don't have as great a sleep need, but we still have this urge to sleep. This is circadian rhythms driving hard for sleep at this point right here to give us a longer sleep window. What I'm showing you, hopefully, and I know this is a bit confusing, but what I'm trying to show you on this chart is that circadian rhythms work to oppose homeostasis. What they do here is homeostasis has resulted in a decreased sleep need because we've been sleeping. So the longer you've been sleeping, that sleep need dissipates, but we haven't done everything that sleep does at this point. And so circadian rhythms drive hard for sleep, extending the sleep window. And then at the point that it's time to wake up, what we do, we wake up and our sleep urge has now, the feeling that we're tired has dissipated, as well as our sleep need. And so we've gotten the sleep we need, we begin our day, and now this is where we start to accumulate a sleep need, but circadian rhythms are driving hard for wakefulness at this point. And so we're able to make it through our morning without impaired performance. But look at this red line right here. This is interesting because this is where circadian rhythms actually allow us to have the afternoon nap. So they allow us, notice that we built up a sleep need by being awake for several hours. And then in the mid-afternoon, we're designed to have a nap. And so this is the circadian gate opening and allowing us to experience that sleepiness so that we could take a nap. And then after the nap window, then circadian rhythms begin driving hard for wakefulness again. And so what you see here is that circadian rhythms are extending the wake period. So this is a period where we've been up for a long time, toxicity is built up, wakefulness is toxic again. And so we've built up this big sleep need, but we don't feel tired because circadian rhythms are driving hard for wakefulness at this time, extending our day. So what I'm trying to show you here on this chart is that circadian rhythms work with homeostasis to create a long sleep window and a long waking day, a full 16-hour waking day with unimpaired performance, with the exception of this afternoon lull here, and a long continuous sleep with periods of wakefulness, but long sleep. It allows us to get all of the benefits of sleep. So that's really what circadian rhythms are doing when we're talking about the sleep-wake rhythm. At one point in the sleep-wake rhythm, they're driving hard for sleep. And at another point, they're driving hard for wakefulness, allowing us to extend our sleep as well as extend our sleep. Hopefully you'll understand that. Now, to just bring a refresher to the previous talk, we talked about how sleep changes as a normal course of aging. And an important part here is to look at what those changes look like. You can see, we talked about how sleep, we end up with decreased quantity, quality, decreased consolidation, and decreased sleep efficiency. And I showed you this chart here where you could see that it was this back half of the sleep window where a lot of the disruption was. In the front half of the sleep window, the individual is able to fall asleep and stay asleep for about 3 or 4 hours. But then after that, they wake up. And from that point on, they have difficulty sustaining sleep. They may fall asleep for a bit, but they're not able to sustain it for long periods of time. And so this is really what I'm showing you on this chart. It's poor circadian regulation. It's a weakened sleep zone right here. So circadian rhythms have weakened in older adults. And remember, older adults are, beginning in their 30s. So 30 to 50 is a young older adult, 50 to 70 is a middle older adult, and 70 plus are the real winners. And so what I'm drawing your attention to is this piece right here, the back half of the sleep window, when homeostasis is no longer driving hard for sleep because we've been sleeping for several hours, but we're in the back half of the sleep window and the circadian rhythms aren't driving hard for sleep at this point. That's what we're looking at when I'm showing you this part of the chart, this back half. And so what we need to understand is this balance between circadian rhythms driving hard for sleep in this back half. And what we need to do is get our circadian rhythms to be working again. So I'm going to show you again on a different chart. So here we've got from the point that we wake up, wakefulness is toxic, we're building a sleep need. And that goes for the entire time that we're awake. And remember, as I said, we're designed for a 16-hour waking day of unimpaired performance, with the exception of a little afternoon nap, lull. And then we go to sleep and we dissipate that sleep need. And so again, I'm showing you right here that it doesn't take 8 hours to dissipate this sleep need. In fact, by about the 4-hour mark, most of the sleep need, the homeostatic sleep need, has dissipated. So what we need is another mechanism. And that's where circadian rhythms come in. So at some points of the day, of the 24-hour cycle, I should say, circadian rhythms will drive hard for wakefulness. From the point that we begin our day, you can see now in green, circadian rhythms are beginning to think of it as counterbalance. So they're offsetting. There's an increased need for sleep the longer we've been awake. But what's happening with circadian rhythms is that there's an increased wake drive to counterbalance that, so that we end up with unimpaired performance. We can continue to sustain wakefulness and attend and do all of the important things that we need to do. But then in the mid-afternoon, there is this lull where our circadian drive actually allows us, it turns off wake promoting for this afternoon part. And this is why we experience that. And let me point out that the greater your sleep debt, so let's say that you haven't been getting the sleep you need for several nights in a row, shift workers will understand that feeling. If you haven't, then during this afternoon lull, you'll feel dog tired, because instead of driving hard for wakefulness, your circadian rhythms are allowing you to have a nap at this window. We are designed to have a nap here. And then after that nap window ends, then circadian rhythms begin driving incredibly hard again. And this is what we call the wake maintenance zone. This is the few hours before our normal bedtime. So here is normal bedtime. And so during this period of time, circadian rhythms are driving very, very hard for wakefulness. And why are they doing that? Because after all of this period of time that you've been awake, you've built up a massive sleep need from a homeostatic perspective. And so you've got this big, big sleep need, and therefore circadian rhythms need to drive incredibly hard for wakefulness at this time to make sure that you're getting that extended wake period, a wake maintenance zone. So here you can see how circadian rhythms work to counterbalance our increased sleep need as a function of prior wakefulness and give us a long, unimpaired day. But then, and this is how they work together again, here at this point when it's actually bedtime, the wake maintenance zone turns off and it allows us to fall quickly to sleep. And then we fall asleep. And right around here, when the sleep need from a homeostatic perspective has dissipated, we then have a circadian gate that opens that drives hard for sleep to extend the sleep window. So what we're seeing with older adults is just imagine not having circadian regulation, high amplitude circadian rhythms driving these two wake maintenance zones and the sleep maintenance zone. What you would have is a person would build a sleep need, then fall asleep, build a sleep need, and then fall asleep. And you would see it here where they've built a sleep need, fallen asleep, and at this point, they don't have much of a sleep need and they'd wake up. So this is explaining what we see in older adults in the back half, this inability to sustain sleep. It's weakened circadian regulation. But the other piece that I haven't mentioned yet is that weakened circadian regulation doesn't just affect the sleep maintenance zone, it also affects the wake maintenance zone. So with older adults, what we see is they're falling asleep, they get sleepy prior to their bedtime. So this is the, sitting in the comfy couch after dinner, watching Netflix and falling asleep on the couch, even though they, not intending to fall asleep at that time. They don't have a strong wake maintenance zone and they don't have a strong sleep maintenance zone. And so that's really what needs to be addressed when we're talking about older adult sleep. This back half of the sleep window where they're unable to sustain sleep. And now this whole time I've been talking about older adults, but remember, shift workers are a model for accelerated aging. And so they're experiencing that in the same way for very much the same reasons, because shift workers, remember, are routinely turning their nights into days and their days into nights as a course of their shift schedule. And so what happens is that that perpetual turning nights into days and days into nights squashes or weakens circadian regulation. So shift workers have weak wake maintenance zones and weak sleep maintenance zones. So then they become more homeostatic. So it's harder for them to sustain sleep for any period of time, but it's also harder for them to sustain unimpaired waking performance for any length of time. What we need to do if we're going to help shift workers and older adults is we have to figure out ways to promote strong circadian regulation so that there's unimpaired performance in the morning. We have to figure out ways to promote a nap window for them in the afternoon, and then promote this strong wake maintenance zone in the back half of the day so that they get a full day, with the exception of this nap window, of unimpaired waking performance. And then when it's nighttime, they can actually get a full sleep. Now, I understand that, for a shift worker, they've got to work at night during those night shifts. And so that means that during the day, they're going between the two night shifts, during the day, they need to be able to get a good sleep. And I will show you exactly how that's done in the slides to come. But first, what I've described here for the older adult situation, when we're talking about older adults, again, we're talking about this weakened back half where we can't get the sleep we need. Well, what we need to do is understand that this is a function of weakened circadian regulation. You can think of it as really a broken clock. And for shift workers, that's just accelerated aging. They've, accelerated the process of breaking down this clock. So how do we go about fixing a broken clock? Well, I'm going to give you an example of what's done in the research. This is just a particularly important study that was a game changer in understanding the impact of circadian regulation and aging. And so what you're seeing in this slide, these are really, really old hamsters. And what you can see in this slide here, right here, this is them running in a wheel. So each horizontal row is actually 48 hours. So here is day 1 activity up here, and this is day 2's activity that followed it 24 hours later. And then it's plotted again down here. So this is day 1, day 2, day 2, day 3, day 3, day 4, and so on. And what I really want you to notice is that when we look at the 48-hour plot here, you can see that this hamster, that the hamsters, what they do is they wake up at night, they're nocturnal, they'll wake up at night and they will begin running in their wheel. It's like foraging for them. So they'll run in their wheel and they'll eat some food, and they'll run in their wheel and they'll eat some food. And in this example, what you're seeing is these hamsters are in a constant environment. Think of that plant study where there's no time cues for them whatsoever. They don't know day from night in terms of light and dark. It's just constant dark for them, constant temperature, constant humidity. Everything's controlled in that environment. But what's important to see is that there isn't a lot of activity in these old hamsters. So these are, if you will, geriatric hamsters. And you can actually see it much more in the chart on the right-hand side, where there's very little activity at all. So an excellent model of aging. Now, what we have on the top are what we call sham controls. So these hamsters, where you see this star on the chart, that's the surgery day. And what happened, the intervention for fixing this broken clock for these hamsters is they got surgery, and they got a brand new suprachiasmatic nucleus. So what I'm really saying there is they got a brand new pacemaker. So it's a brain transplant, but in the sham controls that I'm showing you on the top here, they had various different control levels. So in one example, they would get the surgery, everything would happen except that the new SCN tissue wouldn't be put in. And so they went through the process of the surgery as a control condition, but they didn't get that new SCN. In another level of control, they would get the SCN, but they wouldn't get it in the right place of the brain. So think of getting something, but not getting it in the right location. And then in another level, they would actually get the SCN tissue in the right place. And so that SCN tissue would then graft. It would, think of it as over a period of time, it would begin connecting networks to other neurons and actually becoming a functional SCN. And so what I'm showing you here in the bottom chart are those functional SCNs, where the geriatric hamster got a brand new SCN. And this is possible with the advent of modern science here. We were able to do this. These aren't my studies, but similar to what we would do. And what you can see, something remarkable happens, and it doesn't take very long. It's just a few days after the surgery, there's this dramatic change. These are the same hamsters. There's a dramatic change. Sorry, this is the same hamster here as it is here. And what you can see is that in this group, in the control group, nothing changed in terms of their activity levels. They continued to decline. But in the transplants, what you can see is that the activity is restored. Not only that, but there's a lot more activity, but it's also happening at the same time each day. I'll show you here on this chart. This is an example of an SCN transplant. So this is one that got the SCN tissue in the right location. And what you can see is, if I drew a line, you can see that this pacemaker is now working again to synchronize behavior, so that even though there are no other time cues, and let me remind you, nothing else changed. This is still a geriatric hamster. All of the organs are old, the tissues, the muscles, all of that is still the case. And yet we've turned this back into a young hamster in the terms of what their activity looks like. Here in the bottom chart, you can see those SCN transplants restored amplitude. They restored the activity levels of the hamster. Not only the activity levels, but they restored the timing of that activity. Think of it as turning back that broken clock, fixing the broken clock. And now, so at this point, what's really interesting to see, when I show you the chart of the various control groups here after surgery, these animals then died about 100 days or just over 100 days after surgery. But in the case of the intact control, the intact SCN grafts, these hamsters right here, the viable SCN graft, the one that got the SCN in the right area, and it was able to generate neural pathways and networks. You can see that those hamsters actually didn't die. What happened is to evaluate their grafts, the researchers killed the hamsters. But what you can see here is that they lived well past, in fact, double the length of these controls. What I'm really showing you here is that these SCN transplants increased longevity for the hamsters dramatically. Nothing else changed. They just got a new pacemaker. What I'm showing you here is the impact of circadian rhythms on longevity. When we have strong, healthy circadian rhythms, we can extend capacity for independent living and extend longevity. We can turn back the clock, if you will, on aging. So the good news here is that Dalton Associates has scheduled all of their shift workers for new SCNs. Insert laughter here. I'm joking, of course, but what I'm trying to point out is that if we promote stronger circadian rhythms, we can actually get better sleep health, and we can turn back the clock. So the objective is to, now the important thing for all of you to understand is that your SCNs still work. And so what we need, these pacemakers are still functional. It's actually been the shift work or aging that has caused into days and our days into nights. And so we've turned off, if you will, or we've turned down circadian rhythms. And what we need to do is turn them back up. So the way we fix a broken clock is not by surgery, but to actually do things to promote stronger circadian rhythms. Now, how do we do that? Okay, so timing, as I've been saying all along, is everything. We need to get back to what we evolved for. We need to get back to long, solid light exposure in terms of getting lots of UV protected daylight. We need to get our meal schedule under control, and we need to get our physical activity profile. All of these things need to be telling time the same way. That's really the objective here, is to be able to boost circadian regulation by telling our pacemakers, this is day and this is night. And so how do we go about doing that? Well, as we sort of teased in the previous talk, the key time cues for day are exposure to daylight. Now, we don't have to be exposed to sunlight. It's always best to be exposed to sunlight, but if we can't, we do have access to artificial light sources, but the importance there is that they need to be very, very bright. And so day is signaled by lots of exposure to daylight, access to food. So meals need to be scheduled for daytime, telling us that it is day. And then day is also signaled by activity. And by activity, I don't necessarily mean exercise. I actually mean breaking up sedentary time. And so this is one of the major changes when we understand, and this isn't just shift workers, but our society as a whole, we've become indoor dwelling. So a lot of the work that we do is indoors. And so what's happening is we aren't getting the daylight that we should be getting. The other piece is that because we have access to food 24/7 on demand, we've had a tendency to shift our meal times, and that actually has a profound impact on our overall health and performance, and it alters circadian timing. And I'll show you that in slides to come. The other thing that's happened in our society is that we've become much more day dwelling and much more sedentary during the day, I should say, where we will either be on patrol in the car, or we'll be at a desk. We're spending a lot more time sedentary, and that has a profound impact on our capacity to drive strong circadian rhythms. So day, again, to review, is signaled by lots of exposure to daylight, getting food during the day, and being active, breaking up sedentary time during the day. So the critical thing we need to do is make sure we tell our clock what time it is. Nighttime is the reverse. Nighttime is signaled by the absence of bright light, the absence of food availability. Think fasting now. A key mistake that shift workers make is that they will eat at night when they're on shift, and that ends up driving a host of issues. Because our brain and body need to be ready for the food that we eat. When we eat at night, what we're doing is driving increased rates of blood sugar, and fat going into our bodies, because our brain and body aren't ready for the food. And so more of that food is getting turned into fat and sugar, and that's toxic, increasing our rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes. The other thing that happens when we work at night is it changes, because we're sleep deprived, it changes the types of food that we eat. We crave high, dense, caloric foods, and think carbs. It changes our food cravings, and it also changes the timing of when we're hungry. And so that's a real challenge for shift workers, is that we have to break that cycle. Okay, so nighttime is signaled by the absence of bright light, the absence of food, and also the absence of activity. And so you might be saying to yourself, well, okay, Glenn, I understand I need to coordinate time cues, but I'm a shift worker. I'm working at night, so I have to be exposed to light at night. I have to be exposed to activity at night. And so what I'm going to show you is that it is possible to actually work night shifts without shifting circadian rhythms as much, by making sure that during the day you get a ton of daylight, really bright daylight. Getting your food, you can definitely manage that. And the good news here is that activity doesn't have as potent a signaling. And so if we get these two things right, the light and the meal times, then the bit of activity that we have to do on the night shift won't have as much of an impact. The key is to take the blue light out. So blue blocking is going to be key. I'll show you that in slides to come. We must be consistent about our timing as we're going, to our night shift versus our day shifts. We have to be consistent about the time signals that we're giving our circadian pacemaker. And the other piece is that we need to understand the value of that napping window and know exactly how to use that nap window between the two night shifts to get daytime sleep, as well as, whenever possible, using that nap during the day on our days off, or if possible, during our day shifts, using that nap window to pay back a little bit more of the sleep debt that we've accumulated. All right. I know I'm pummeling you with the science here, but let's see if we can then take this and apply it for shift workers as well as anybody that's on a regular day schedule. So on this chart, what we're looking at is what to do. Remember, what we're trying to do is to anchor our circadian rhythms to stay day, even though we're working nights. And so on days off and day shifts, this is actually quite easy. What we need to do is start with what our protected sleep window is going to be. So what I want you to remember, we're going to build a sleep window, and then we're going to protect that sleep window by what we do during the day and what we do at night. We'll protect that sleep window. And if we do that, remember from the previous talk, we have a sleep accountant, a physiological process that what that sleep accountant does is it tracks our previous sleep-wake history, and it looks at what our day was like. No 2 days are the same, so our sleep needs will change from night to night. Our sleep accountant's job is to balance the books given the sleep window that we have provided it. Now, this is why it's so important to protect a stable sleep window as best we can on days off and day shifts, so that our sleep accountant can predict that sleep window and it can anticipate it and prepare our brain and body for sleep for this sleep window. So how do we do that? The objective here, we've built this sleep window. This is a time that we know we're routinely going to be going to bed. And now we want to know how to protect that sleep window so the sleep accountant can use it and balance the books on a nightly basis. So here we go. The first thing is when we're on our days off and our day shifts, as much as we can, we want to expose ourselves from the beginning of day all the way through to the end of day we want to get as much UV protected sunlight as we possibly can. And if we can't get UV protected sunlight, then what we want to do is get bright light sources, artificial bright light sources, to make it very clear that this is day and this is night. And the way that we signal that this is night is by avoiding light during this period of time here. Okay, that's the first thing. So light is critical. We want lots of light during the day, and we want to avoid blue light in particular at night. And we'll see this in a minute. The other piece of this is changing the way we do our meals. So if we look at it, most people have a tendency to, because they're busy trying to get ready for work and things, they will have a small breakfast, if at all. Many people skip breakfast, and their first meal of the day will be lunchtime. And usually that lunchtime isn't routinely scheduled. That lunchtime is just whenever our schedule allows it. And so that's a mistake that most people are making, in particular shift workers, is maybe not having very routine breakfast and lunch. But even more importantly, if this right here, the dinner time, if that's your largest meal of the day, then what's going to happen is that pacemaker that synchronizes our food, synchronizes to our meals, that pacemaker is going to track this as the beginning of day. Notice what can happen here. If this light happening right here, if this is the beginning of day from the light entrainable pacemaker, remember we have more than one pacemaker. One synchronizes to the solar day-night cycle, and another synchronizes to all of the reward cues, and meals are one of the primary signals for that. So one is going to synchronize to the beginning of day here, and the other would synchronize, if this dinner is your biggest meal of the day, it's going to synchronize here. And that's what most of us in society do, is that our biggest meal of the day is actually at night, just before we go to bed. It's not happening here. It's happening because we've got to commute home, and then we've got to cook. By the time we're actually eating, it's usually quite late in comparison to what time we're intending to go to bed. So what I'm showing you here is a healthier timing of these meals. We want to make sure, and please forgive the gender bias here, but the expression that I would use is that we want to have breakfast like a king, a very big breakfast. We want to have lunch like a prince, a medium-sized lunch. And then we want to have dinner like a pauper. We want to have a small dinner. Now, this is for days off and day shifts. And the key is that we want to make sure that that final meal is happening well in advance of the time that we're about to go to bed, at least 4 to 5 hours. Now, I realize it doesn't take that long to digest the food. It could take, 3 hours, let's say, to digest this meal, depending on how large it is. But the thing that happens that people aren't aware of is it's not just that you have to digest that food before bed. There are downstream impacts of a meal, and they have a profound impact on our sleep window. So key message for you here is that this final meal, if on your days off and your day shifts, if you're eating too close to your bedtime, it's going to make it difficult for you to sustain a healthy sleep architecture. So what we want on days off is to get as much light as possible during the day. And we also want to pair that light signal that this is the beginning of day with a meal, a big meal that says we are starting our day. And then finally, what we want to do is after each of these meals, we want to signal that we're going to use the food we eat. So we've got light, we've got food, and we've got activity. Now, this doesn't have to be exercise, but breaking up sedentary is critical. And so we want to use that food that we've eaten through the day. And this is another reason that the breakfast meal should be the largest meal because it's happening in advance of the most active part of our day. Okay. And then we have to remember melatonin. 2 hours, it begins rising 2 hours before our normal bedtime. So we want to begin avoiding light, blue blocking. And if you're wondering how you blue block, it's very easy to get lenses. Think orange tinted lenses. So orange tinted lenses will subtract the blue and will give you the ability to, not shift. So if you're getting light at night, or if you're getting light in this period of time before your sleep window, the 2 hours before your sleep window, as long as you've got orange lenses, and if you look at the camera, my camera for a second, you can see I'm holding these orange tinted lenses. They must be orange tinted. If they're clear, some companies will sell products called blue blocking and say they're blue blocking when in fact they're clear lenses like this. These lenses are actually, what they're doing is they're blocking out UV, which is also considered blue light. And so that's why clear lenses can sell as blue blockers, because they're blocking out UV light, which is bad for our eye health. Think macular degeneration and glaucoma. But there's also circadian blue, which is blocked by these orange lenses. So that's an important thing. When I say avoid light, I'm talking about blue blocking using orange tinted lenses. Okay, so let's bring it all together now for shift workers. What we want to do is we want to understand this last chart. I was talking about the days off and the day shifts. And if you think of it, let's say that you're on 2 days, you've got a shift system of 2 days, 2 nights, and 4 off. If we look at it from the beginning of our 4 offs, this is the schedule for 6 days out of an 8-day rotation. You would have 4 days off that you could anchor your circadian rhythms using this system. And then you have 2 day shifts that you could also anchor your circadian rhythms to this system. But there's going to be these 2 night shifts. And so what you need to understand is, how do I anchor circadian rhythms while working a night shift? And so here's a different chart to show you. And what I'm doing here in the blue, this is the homeostatic sleep drive that's building as a function of prior wakefulness. And then in the yellow here, this is the circadian rhythm that's driving hard for wakefulness to counterbalance. Except for these 3 red circles here, that's the nap window. And then after the nap window closes, you've got more driving hard for wakefulness. And here's your wake maintenance zone that I showed you earlier. Then we go to sleep. But during the night shift, we're not going to be able to go to sleep. But this is what our system is programmed for, is a sleep right during this period. Okay. And this should be our sleep maintenance zone, but we're going to be on shift. So that's going to be a safety critical, a time when we're at risk for safety critical tasks because we're really tired during this time. That's that period between 1 and 5 in the morning where you're exhausted and it's really hard to stay awake, but you're on the night shift. So you've got to do things to protect yourself here. All right. So as a shift worker, what we want to do on the day before that first night shift, we want to use this window to get some sleep. So we want to get a nap in advance of the night shift. So anytime here, we want to try to get a nap. Then we're going to start our duty shift or on duty time. And now the time here may change as a function of what shift you're on. But for this one, we're just looking at a full night shift. And so this is the example I'm providing. And so what happens, notice this is a period of time. We would normally during this period of time want to be blue blocking so that we could get to sleep. Remember, melatonin begins rising 2 hours before our normal bedtime. And so even on the day shift, I tell you to blue block prior to going to bed, those couple of hours, so that we can get a really good night's sleep. Well, on the night shift, during this period of time right here, if at all possible, if you can, this would be a good time to begin avoiding light. Right here, you see I'm saying to avoid light. This is the 2 hours before what would be your normal bedtime. This is going to help you avoid phase delaying or causing that shift. So you're working at night during this period of time, but you could avoid shifting by blue blocking using these orange tinted lenses, if that's possible. If you can, you would want to do that. But if you can't, that's fine. Now, this is that period of time you're on shift. And then notice, and this is very important, this period of time here is what would normally be your sleep maintenance zone. So this is that danger zone where you're exhausted and really tired. And so what we want you to do during this, anytime you can, you should nap. But if you're unable to nap as part of that shift, that's fine. But whenever you can, if you're allowed to, try to nap, because this is a good time for sleep. And even a 10-minute nap can help get you through the night shift more safely, because you're dissipating some sleep needs. Remember, we've accumulated a sleep need. And so during that night shift, any napping that you can do will help dissipate some of that sleep need. However, if you can't nap, then during this period of time right here, that danger zone that I'm saying, what you want to do is get as much bright light as you possibly can during this period of time to help you stay alert and be safe during what would be a dangerous time, because your circadian rhythm is driving so hard for sleep at this time. So by getting lots of blue rich light, you can turn off that sleep promotion at that period of time. Now, here's a key, and this is a mistake that a lot of shift workers are making, is that at the end of the shift, you want to get lots of light. And a lot of shift workers will come home and then go immediately to bed because they're dog tired, they're exhausted. But what you should actually be doing is anchoring your circadian rhythm at this point and getting lots and lots of light to stay day. So what you want is on the day between the two night shifts, you want to come home from your first night shift, you want to get lots of light, have breakfast, have a regular mealtime breakfast, lots of food. And then after a few hours, that's when you want to go to sleep. And so what you want to do is go to sleep not immediately after the shift, but a few hours after you've gotten home. And then that'll allow you to fall asleep. You've built up a huge sleep need, so you're going to be able to fall asleep, sleep for a few hours. And then instead of waking up into a wake maintenance zone, you'll wake up into this nap window, and that will allow you to get a longer sleep. This will allow you to extend your sleep so that you can then sleep until the afternoon prior to the beginning of your next shift. So the way to get a proper daytime sleep between two night shifts is to stay up for a few hours after your night shift ends, get lots of light, have your normal breakfast, and then go to sleep. You will skip your afternoon meal, but you'll still be able to have your breakfast and your dinner, and then you'll do your night shift. All right. So now we're going to open it up to questions for the final 15 minutes here. Please feel free to submit those, and then we will begin answering.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read out the questions here. I know people have been actively listening. I have one question in, so please submit any others that you have through the chat. So this question is, if homeostasis is our sleep need, why is it important for us to extend our sleep even when our sleep need is at zero?
That's an awesome question. So when I'm talking about sleep need from a homeostatic perspective, I'm talking about this toxicity. So when we look at this, the longer we've been awake, the greater our need for sleep. We've built up this toxicity in our brains and our body that needs to be washed away. But it doesn't take 8 hours to wash all of that away. However, remember from our previous talks that that's not all that sleep does. Remember when we talked about elite sleep, sleep literally washes the brain and the body of the day's waste. So that gets washed away. But then in the back half of the sleep, what's happening? Remember, I said that we are consolidating learning and memory. We're processing our day and prioritizing what needs to be remembered and what can be forgotten. In that back half, we're processing trauma. We're building resilience. We're doing so many things, muscle memory, knowledge acquisition, all of those things. So what people are missing is that time, that dissipated sleep need just is referring to one aspect of what sleep does. There are many, many things that sleep does. We need to first wash our brain, and then in the back half of the sleep window, we need to use that well-washed brain to consolidate learning and memory, process trauma, build resilience, all those things. So the answer to the question there is that that's just one part of what sleep does. And circadian rhythms extend the sleep windows so that we can finish the job.
Well, this individual got it because they followed it up by saying, is it due to the REM cycle? Have our brains not finished processing the day and thus need to extend our sleep?
Yeah, so, that is absolutely the
perfect.
case.
Okay. I do not have other questions in the chat. Does anybody want to take this opportunity to maybe kind of raise, an individual sleep challenge? Oh, I got a good job message for you.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, here's a question. This getting some questions in now. This all seems logical for the average / normal person, but even following this advice, how would one suffering from PTSD keep sleeping without medication?
Oh, that's a really important question. So there isn't a simple answer to that question. I don't think this will be a surprise to the questioner. A big part when you're dealing with PTSD, a big part of that is that you've got, like that backpack is full. And so it's a gradual process. And I'm not saying that promoting stronger circadian rhythms is the only thing that matters. It isn't. But by building a strong sleep window, by protecting that sleep window by what we do during the day and at night, what we can do is unencumber that sleep accountant. So think of it as really it's about team-based care. So you're going to have, you may have meds that you're on. You can have therapy. All of these things that what we're talking about is just adding to that team-based care, adding a level so that we're building strong circadian rhythms to make those other interventions more powerful.
Sorry,
just one more thing
with my mute button there. Yeah, go ahead.
So just one more thing to add to that. What I want, I don't know if I really explained that well. So what I want to add to that is there can be lots of reasons why a person, especially somebody experiencing PTSD, there can be lots of reasons why they aren't able to sleep. But what we want to do is subtract circadian dysregulation from that equation so that we want to remove that as a driver of poor sleep so that they can focus solely on, the other team-based care interventions.
Thank you. And can you also speak to nightmares?
Sure. So now, and this typically what's going on with nightmares is that we are processing a traumatic event. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be PTSD, but there is, and we did talk about this a little bit before, but I appreciate the opportunity to expand. So what happens when we're sleeping and we're in that dream state of sleep, REM sleep, what's really going on there is a number of very important functions. One is that we're processing our day in an unbounded way, so we can be creative. We're reliving our day, but we're not having to follow the rules of regular daily living. For example, in our dreams, we can fly, we can do things that we wouldn't actually be able to do. It allows us to be much more creative in problem solving. And this is one of the reasons why when we wake up in the morning, sometimes we wake up with a solution to a problem that's been troubling us for a long time. This is where that expression, well, just sleep on it. Let's come back to this, another day. Well, that's where that comes from. That's an actual process that REM sleep does. Now, in terms of nightmares, to get to the questioner's issue, nightmares can be a way of processing a traumatic event. And when I mean traumatic event, I'm talking about a new learning event that has a strong negative emotional tag to it. So any traumatic event is a learning event from a psychological perspective, from a behavior perspective. The experience is, man, that was awful. Don't want to do that again. And so when we're processing it, that nightmare is really what we're doing is removing that negative emotional tag. And we talked about this a little bit when we say, it's like a computer scan at night when we're not using our computers and the computer is doing a virus scan. If something happens that interferes or interrupts that virus scan and it's not able to complete it, then what will happen is the system will go into a loop and it'll continue trying to process that virus scan. Similarly, when we're having recurring nightmares, we're having these nightmares, it's trying to process the negative emotional tag. And if something's altering our REM sleep and not allowing us to get rid of that negative emotional tag, then it'll keep going through it until it's able to do that. And so that can be a driver. And the objective here is to be able to remove the negative tag, the negative emotion. Think sympathetic nervous system overdrive now. It's to remove that sympathetic nervous system component from the event so that you can relive the event without all of that fight or flight response. You're muted again.
I think I have sticky mouse here. It's not moving on me very well. Thank you. All right. Any other questions from anyone? I was going to say it was a lot of information and a lot of really great information, and I can appreciate that. It can take some time to process that and make sense of it, and then to really think about what does that mean for each individual, right, in terms of their own questions or challenges.
Yeah. So if I could just add one thing, and people may have questions, and what I would encourage people to do is, if they're willing, they can always reach out to me, because everybody's situation is different. And so how this science applies to each individual will vary as a function of their lived experience. And so if they want to reach out, they can reach out through you, or they can email me directly at Glenn with 2 N's, glenn@elitesleep.ca if they choose to. And I'm here to help.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much again. This has been just a really invaluable and important, educational piece, I think. And, your expertise is awesome. So thank you so much. I want to thank all of the participants as well for taking this time out of your day. Just a reminder that these sessions are all recorded on the Encompas Care website. And if you have any questions, any one of us, just contact us through the Encompas number. and any one of us can guide you to that. And we will send out the slides and any questions that might come in to us, if that's okay with you. Again, Dr. Landry.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. I will do that. And please understand, there's so much to this. I realize that, really during these sessions, you've been drinking through a fire hose. As you mentioned, there's a ton of science here, and this is really meant to be just the beginning in the journey toward improved sleep health. So it's really just a starting point for us.
Yeah, but I think, what's so powerful, for me is so often you think that there's nothing you can do about it, right? It particularly, for people that are working shifts, and there are things that can be done about it. And I just, know from even speaking with people that have, used your services before, they've turned things around, and it's been life-saving for many people. So
that's a really important point. Thank you. It's critical that, we understand that there are things we can do to improve our sleep, even though we're working shifts. Very often, shift workers who are experiencing poor sleep think, well, of course I am. I've worked shifts. That's just inevitable. And what I hope we've communicated in this series is that there are things you can do. Now, it's just a starting point, and we're here to help. But there are absolutely things that you can do to improve your sleep health while still working shifts.
Okay, all righty. Well, thank you, everybody. A couple of more thanks here on the chat. I appreciate that. And we will post the this final session. And again, if anybody has ideas for sessions starting again in the fall, please send those through to us. All right, thank you so much, Dr. Landry. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.